Good morning. I'm Dana Harris, Vice President of State and Federal Advocacy at the Austin Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for joining us today for our Pulse on Policy series. I want to especially thank our sister chambers for partnering with us. The Greater Asian Austin Chamber, the Greater Austin Black Chamber, the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber, and the LGBT Chamber. We know this is a difficult and uncertain time for all of us. The Chamber is trying to do what we can to provide information and resources to our member businesses. We would be remiss to not acknowledge the events that have unfolded throughout this country during the past few weeks. The Chamber rejects racism and stands with the voices of our community who are calling for reform. Rejecting racism and standing for equality, justice, and respect are essential to a stronger community, a healthier future, and a better Austin for all. Senator Cornyn, before we begin our discussion on liability reform, can you briefly share your thoughts on how our nation can heal and move forward towards equality?
Well, obviously, the tragic death of George Floyd has spurred a national conversation and outrage at the tragedy in which he lost his life and raised fundamental questions about race and policing and our justice system. I was honored yesterday to talk to his family by phone, who are from Houston, but mainly I just wanted to listen to what they had to say, in addition to offering my condolences. Rodney, his brother, told me that they're from Texas and what they wanted was Texas-sized justice. And I said, well, I'll do my very best to see that you get that. We need to find ways to root out racial injustice, but it's going to require bipartisan commitment, and it's going to require us to listen to people whose experience is different from our own. I'm thinking about my friend Tim Scott, an African-American senator from South Carolina, who, to my surprise, has told me that when he comes on to even the campus of the United States Capitol, that he's treated differently by police than other members like me, for example. And he's been stopped on numerous occasions. So trying to figure out the reasons for and addressing the distrust between some of the folks in the minority community is going to be really important. And obviously, this is the most recent manifestation of what I believe is the original sin of our country when it was founded, which was the sin of slavery, which took 600,000 lives during the Civil War, has led to a long, hard march through the 60s and greater equality and rights, but obviously we still have more to do.
Dana, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. This webinar is part of the Chamber's Pulse on Policy series, and we'd like to thank this year's sponsors, AT&T and Amazon. Senator Cornyn really wanted this to be primarily a listening session to hear from members of the business community in Austin. We have a great lineup today. This webinar will be recorded, and we plan to share this on our website soon in case you miss anything. At this time, I would like to introduce Jason Winborn. Jason is the Vice President of External Affairs for AT&T serving the Central Texas area. In his current role, he is responsible for developing and executing strategies impacting AT&T's participation in the Texas political process. Jason's responsibilities include state legislative policy and initiatives for Texas, development of legislative and political strategy, as well as participating in community development initiatives. Jason?
Well, Dana, thank you very much for the kind introduction. We are grateful to be joined today by our senior U.S. Senator, John Cornyn. He has served Texas as a judge, as Attorney General, and now as our U.S. Senator. He has earned a reputation as an articulate and powerful voice for Texans in Washington. He's known for reaching across the aisle to get things accomplished, as he has done for recently passed coronavirus relief legislation and now for liability reform. Welcome, Senator.
With the thanks to all my friends at the chambers, various chambers that are on this call. As you know, in response to the COVID-19 virus, Congress has passed 4 different bills to bolster our support for workers and businesses affected by the economic fallout, as well as to make sure that our economy is able to recover, hopefully, as soon as we possibly can. But as our economy begins to reopen, we've seen that litigation is going to be one of the key things that could potentially retard our ability to reopen and see our economy rebound. We know that it's not just going to be about suits against healthcare providers, but also nursing homes, colleges, government, retailers, you name it. And while given my background as a practicing lawyer and judge, these are issues that I'm familiar with and have been over the years. But I just wanted to say up front that we're not talking about blanket immunity. If somebody directed a person who had the virus to go back into a nursing home and infect in the process nursing home residents, and they've suffered injury and death, obviously there needs to be a remedy. But for those who in good faith have followed the guidelines of federal and local authorities and tried to do everything they could do to safely reopen their business, we believe there ought to be some safe harbor for them. So really what we are talking about is liability based on willful or reckless misconduct. And for other types of lawsuits, there would be a complete bar to that litigation if you do follow in good faith the guidelines that I mentioned earlier. But as we know, it's not enough to just win a lawsuit once a case is filed, because the cost of litigation itself could make the difference between survival or demise of a business. So these are the similar sort of provisions that were adopted during other mass crises, like the Y2K issue back when our computers, we didn't know whether they would go forward to 2000 or back to 1900. There's been a number of times where the Congress has stepped up to temporarily and in a targeted way to change tort law. But there is no desire, certainly not on my part, to take over or hijack state tort law. This is a targeted and temporary provision, which hopefully will help our economy reopen and benefit everyone.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Senator. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce some of our Central Texas business leaders to talk about the challenges they are facing as we begin to reopen. First up, we have Alta Alexander, owner of Altitudes, representing the retail industry. Alta?
Good morning, everyone. I am the owner, I'm Alta Alexander, and I am the owner of Altitudes in Austin, Texas. Altitudes is the first and only upscale African-American owned women's boutique in Texas's capital city. We're proud to hold that designation. And we curate gorgeous apparel locally to globally. Our storefront is proudly located in the heart of historic East Austin. Our plan is to open, it includes mandating that everyone wear a face mask, of course, for entry for shopping. If they don't have one, we do have a one-time use mask for those who may have forgotten theirs. And we will also have hand sanitizer stations and floor decals to help them make sure that they social distance. Sometimes when you're shopping, it gets away from you. Anticipated liabilities foreseen on the horizon are, there's not a mandate within our city to say that you have to wear the mask. So I'm thinking that maybe folks will potentially refuse to wear the mask or social distance, thereby impacting others. That's all I have. I think, Dana, are you muted? Okay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for those remarks. And next up, we have Fayez Kazi with Similitude. He is representing the engineering and construction industry. Fayez?
Thanks, Dana. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fayez Kazi. Similitude is a company that I founded 10 years ago that provides civil engineering services and land development consulting. We primarily work in the urban core in downtown Austin and school projects and affordable housing projects in Austin. We're currently working on the new Google Tower, and we worked on the tower that's Google's currently in as well. We've been fortunate to be in Austin in a period of growth, and we've had major growth every year since we started 10 years ago, except for this year. We haven't had to let anyone go. We're actually adding folks to our team, but it's been challenging to add new people while they're not able to come into the office and go through orientation and so on. But we do need to add the capacity. Last few months have been challenging because it's hard to work virtually in our industry. There's a lot of collaboration. Productivity has not been the same. We've slowly started to open back up, but we're struggling with what our message should be to our team. Our team members are young and smart and engaged, and they have questions about whether it's safe yet or not. Our message has been that we would like for you to come back into work, and that we have a clear procedure of social distancing within the office, and face masks and disinfectants and so on, and increased cleaning and so on. But as far as liability in particular, we're sort of in the dark. When someone's working in the office, do we need to know what they're doing when they're not in the office? Do we need to know where they've been? One of our team members attended the Black Lives Matter protest in Austin this past weekend. And she's now working from home until she gets tested. But this is not something that's sustainable. I mean, we're not in a position to be able to police what our folks are doing outside of work. And so I think really we need better guidelines on how to work safely from an office, better guidelines on our liability. We need to get our team back to ensure that we continue to grow and continue to provide the services that Austin needs for affordable housing and infrastructure. And I think finally, I want to add, we need our government to be more aligned in the guidance and the messaging. I think we hear differences between what we hear from Austin and what we hear from Texas and what we hear from the federal government. And I think we need our leaders to be more aligned. We want to continue to grow Similitude and provide a safe place for our 20 folks to work. And for this, we do need our leaders to get in the game and give us aligned guidance. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you. Next up, we have Cameron Lockley, owner of Gusto Italian Kitchen and Wine Bar. He is representing the restaurant hospitality industry. Cameron?
Hi, thank you, Dana, and thank you, Senator Cornyn, for today and this opportunity. I'm the owner of a trattoria restaurant in North Central Austin, independently owned and operated, and we serve farm-to-table seasonal Italian cuisine here in the neighborhood, as well as provide catering services all over Central Texas. We did decide to open back up on May 1st and have been following all of the state recommendations from Governor Abbott. A couple of the hurdles that the restaurant industry specifically faces is that a lot of our employees are part-time and also don't have the ability to get health insurance. And so as they are encountering either symptoms, illnesses, et cetera, they get somewhat confused about what their resources are, or they just don't know what they should do, and end up just deciding to stay home for 2 weeks as opposed to go get tested or go see a doctor because they're scared of what maybe the consequences of that might be. And then building upon what the other panelists have been talking about, the alignment in recommendations and policies has also been very confusing. So when there's recommendations for our guests to wear face masks as they enter the building when they're not at the table, but then certain more prominent figures in politics specifically don't wear masks or are pushing to not have masks at their own events, it makes it difficult for consistency in that messaging. And that's definitely been something that we deal with and that our employees are concerned about. And it makes them more apprehensive and more scared coming into the workplace when they know that they're going to be guests who really don't want to be doing that, haven't been doing that elsewhere. Maybe they put a mask on as they enter, but then they'll get up and walk around without. And we do our best to encourage and so forth, but we're not necessarily going to police that, if you will. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Cameron. And last but not least, we have Ahmed Moladina. He's the CEO of Soul Technologies. He is representing the HR talent acquisition industry. Ahmed?
Thank you, Dana. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Senator Cornyn. Nice to be on the call. I'm in an interesting position where we have people within our office. Take a step back, sorry. I'm the CEO of Soul Technologies, as Dana mentioned, and we're in the IT staffing and consulting business as well as healthcare staffing business. So with the nature of that business, we have people within our office recruiting and doing sales and doing back office work, as well as people that are in the field providing support to our clients, such as hospitals and state agencies and cities or private companies. There are things that I can do internally for our organization, which we've already done, and I've bought lots of hand sanitizers and masks and different things for everyone and set protocols for coming into the office, and we can control that environment very successfully, I would imagine. But for what they do outside of the office is still a challenge. And for our businesses, whether it be my staffing company or whether it be any business, to basically be hit with a lawsuit for people's actions, whether they go to a protest or whether they go to a retail store or grocery store and are not careful of what they're doing, it becomes a challenge for our businesses. So we're looking for some guidance, some information, and some checks and balances in how we can, as businesses, be protected. Because from our perspective, I'm also sending people to my client sites and to hospitals and to other businesses. So how do I protect them? And of course, all these different businesses have also followed all the federal, the state, and local government protocols for safety and security. But at the same time, we don't know what happens outside of work. So I'm just looking for some guidance and protection from that front as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Senator, I think we have a few minutes for a couple of questions. And one thing that we're curious about is, do you expect broad support of your liability reform legislation? And how quickly do you think Congress will get this moving and signed into law?
Well, Dana, the majority leader has said this will be in the next installment of COVID-19 legislation. And so I'm relatively confident that it will be there. And then this will be in the July timeframe. Some of the money, quite a bit of the money that we've already appropriated is not out the door yet. For example, the Federal Reserve lending facility, the Main Street lending facility hasn't even been set up yet because of the complexity. We know while the PPP program has been enormously successful in getting money out the door to helping our small businesses, that there are other things that perhaps we need to tweak and change, and we just we want to make sure that the next bill we pass, again in the July timeframe, will both clean up some of the problems that were created before, because we acted so quickly and in such a big way because we felt it was so urgent, that we just think we can do a better job by taking a moment, tapping the brakes a little bit, making sure the money's deployed, but then assessing how well it worked and where it didn't work and fix it.
What else can we expect in future coronavirus relief legislation after this next iteration?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about state and local stabilization funds. As you know, the March 25th bill, I think it was, the CARES Act had $150 billion in money that came to cities and counties and to the state. One of the things that we've heard from the big cities and the big counties is they were able to apply directly, but the smaller ones weren't. And now they're engaged in discussions with the governor's office about how to deploy the rest of that money. But Texas got $11.2 billion out of that. And we know there's a lot of lost revenue by local jurisdictions, and because that's the way they provide their services, through sales tax revenue. So we're monitoring that situation and trying to help, as I said earlier, because we acted so quickly and so boldly. There's been some lagging advice, for example, from the Treasury Department. There's been some debates over, for example, if you get a PPP loan, can you still deduct your ordinary expenses from your business? So those are things that we are still trying to try to provide that guidance for everybody to maximize the impact of this legislation, what Congress is doing. If I can just, this is a common theme among Ahmed and Cameron and others about consistency of advice. You know, this has been challenging for all of us because there isn't any playbook. We just haven't experienced anything quite like this. So we've been kind of doing this on the fly. Obviously, some of the initial projections and models have proved to be incorrect, or else the virus did not read those models and decided to act differently. It's been a little unpredictable, and I understand why people feel like they're trying to do their best, but they're getting inconsistent or conflicting advice. And there's even some suggestions that, particularly in social media, that some of our nation's adversaries, like Russia in the 2016 election, trying to cause dissension and discord, is using this virus as a way to cause us dissension and discord among each other. So this is a complex situation, and I know everybody's doing the best they can, but in terms of the liability issue, we want to make sure that people who act in good faith and follow the guidance that are provided either at the federal, state, or local level, that they have that safe harbor and they don't have to worry about losing their business to a lawsuit.
Thank you. One last question. I know that it's almost time for you to go, but one last question. I know we've talked about the business side of all of this. What about the medical side and the possible vaccination, and what's the timeline for that? What's the latest on the medical side?
Well, Dana, you're right. We're running a couple of races in parallel here, and one of those races is toward a treatment and a vaccine. Ultimately, when we get a vaccine, which Dr. Fauci said could be by the end of this year, then we hopefully can relegate this virus to the same status as the seasonal flu. We know now that it tends to be very hard on the elderly and people with underlying chronic illnesses. And so my view is we need to vaccinate the most vulnerable to make sure first, as those vaccines become available. But in the meantime, there's all sorts of treatments being in 100 different clinical trials being tested. And I think we're going to be in a much better place in the fall than we were at the very beginning, when we were basically starting from a stop. We're going to be much better off. But again, to the point that your panelists made, this isn't just about the government, whether it's a state or local or the federal government setting the guidelines. Ultimately, this is going to be about the confidence that your customers and your employees have about being able to re-enter the workplace and get on with their lives. And I think the biggest test we're all going to have is, how does mom and dad feel about sending their kids to school at the end of the summer and in the fall? That's going to be, to me, the ultimate test of confidence. And I think it's going to be a combination of all the things we're doing, including increased access to testing and the knowledge that each of us have a role to play individually in stopping the spread of this virus by doing the things that your mother taught you when you were growing up. Wash your hands frequently. And then, of course, the issue of social distancing and, yes, masks. But even the octogenarians in the United States Senate have been going back to work in the last few weeks. And I would say that a lot of this is pretty basic, but I understand the inconsistency of communications and just everything that's going, all we're hearing on this virus. But we've actually learned a lot, I think, from our experience now. So it's not all a matter of predictions. It's a matter of what our experience has been so far. And I think my experience has been, if you observe the guidelines in terms of your personal hygiene and social distancing and masking, that you're at relatively low risk. If you're in a nursing home or assisted living facility, or if you're in a jail or prison or work in a meat packing plant, you're at higher risk due to unique circumstances for each one of those settings. So this has been a challenge for everybody, including the isolation of being at home and perhaps with the kids, but even with increased incidents and things like domestic violence, when people have nowhere to go, no money coming in the front door. This has been very trying for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But you have my assurance that we're leaving no stone unturned, and we're doing everything we know how to do to deal both with the public health and the economic consequences of this virus. And like every other crisis we've lived through in Texas, whether it's a hurricane or something like a pandemic, we will get through this together.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This legislation is extremely important to the business community, and especially for our small businesses here in Austin. We really appreciate you pushing for it in a bipartisan way, and we look forward to working with you and helping and guiding, giving any advice or anything we can do to help get this across the line. And thank you for your opening remarks as well.
Well, I thank the panelists in particular. It's great to have those individual stories. It helps me when I'm trying to explain what the impact of the legislation would be on an individual business, to be able to have those stories and that background information. So thank you so much.
Well,
you all have a great day.
Thanks, you too. We look forward to seeing you soon. So I want to thank everybody on the line for joining us today, all of our panelists and all of our sister chambers for everything they've done to help put this together. I want to remind all of you for some upcoming events. Tomorrow, we have another webinar on global innovation and technology. Team will be hosting a diversity and funding opportunities for emerging companies. And then on Thursday, June 11th at 2 p.m., we're going to host a Power Up webinar on data security in the remote workplace. On Thursday, June 18th, at 11 a.m., we're partnering with Norton Rose here in town, and we're going to host a webinar on back to work best practices and talk about some of the OSHA and CDC guidelines and how those play into getting everyone back to work. And then on Wednesday, June 24th at 2 p.m., we're going to host a candidate forum for our Senate District 14 candidates. For those of you on our Government Relations Council, that next meeting will be in August. And last but certainly not least, as a reminder, please register to vote in the upcoming special and runoff elections on July 14th. The deadline to register is June 15th. I think that's Thursday of this week. Early voting begins June 29th. And if you have any questions, you can email me or learn more at votetexas.gov. Also, 2020 is a census year. Complete the 2020 census at 2020census.gov. Your participation helps determine how many seats in Congress and how much federal funding Texas gets going forward in the future. I once again want to thank all of our panelists. I know everyone is super busy at this time, and I just really thank you for taking the time to be with us. And also to our sister chambers, we couldn't do this without you. So I hope all of you have a great week and hope to see you on some of our upcoming webinars. So thank you so much.